Half asleep, with her cheek already on the pillow, my 8-year-old asked me if Uncle Ray was going to tuck her in on the nights I worked, the way he usually did. And I had never, in my whole life, heard the name Uncle Ray. I kept my hand on her back. I kept my voice soft. I said something about how Daddy would always tuck her in when he was home, and that it was time to close her eyes. And she did. And she was asleep in a minute, the way only a tired child can be. And I sat on the edge of that little bed in the dark, a long time after her breathing went slow and even. Because I had spent 18 years learning to keep my face calm while everything underneath it came apart. And I needed every bit of that training right then. I am a paramedic. I have spent my whole career learning one thing above all others, and it is this. The patient who is screaming has an airway, has a pulse, has a fight left in him. It is the quiet one you run to first. The one who has gone still and grey and stopped complaining is the one bleeding out on the inside. And quiet, in my line of work, is the most dangerous sound there is. For 2 years, my marriage had been quiet. No fighting, no slammed doors, just a calm I had mistaken for peace. And sitting on my daughter's bed, I understood at last that the quiet had never been peace. It had been a bleed, and I had walked past it every single day on my way to save strangers. Stay with me, because what I did over the next several months, instead of what every cell in my body wanted to do that night, is the whole reason I am telling you this. This is not a story about a man getting even. It is a story about a father who found out a stranger had been moved into his children's lives behind his back, who kept his head, and who made sure that when the dust settled, his kids landed in the safest, steadiest place there was. With him. I am 44 years old. I run an ambulance for the county in eastern Pennsylvania, mostly nights, because nights pay better and somebody has to be out there at 3 in the morning when the worst things happen. I have been married for 15 years, 2 kids, a boy who is 15 and a girl who is 8. If you are out there tonight, working while the world sleeps, or lying awake while it does, tell me in the comments where you are watching from. A lot of us are up at strange hours carrying things we do not talk about. It helps to know the rig next to us has its lights on too. Let me tell you about the trust first, because without it, this is just a sad story instead of the one I am really telling. I married Dana when I was 29. She was warm and quick to laugh, and she did not flinch at the things my job dragged home in my eyes some mornings. A medic sees things. You walk into the worst 10 minutes of strangers' lives, over and over, and you carry a little of each one home. And Dana was the person who could take that off me without my having to say a word. I loved her for that. I built my whole life on the idea that no matter what I saw out there in the dark, there was a warm, steady house to come home to. And I worked nights. That is the part that matters. The overnight shift is where the money is. And with 2 kids and a mortgage, the money mattered. So 4, 5 nights a week, I kissed my kids goodnight and drove off into the dark while the rest of the town locked its doors. And I came home as the sun came up, and I slept while my family lived its daytime life without me. I told myself that was love. Every night shift was a roof and groceries and my son's braces and a little put away for college. When a man is built to provide, he tells himself that being gone in the dark is the same as being there in the light, as long as he brings home the check. It is not. I know that now. I was out saving other people's families in the small hours, and a stranger was quietly moving into mine. I want you to know what those nights actually were, because the word shift is too clean for them. It was pulling a teenager out of a wrapped car at 2 in the morning and working him the whole way to the hospital and not knowing for 3 days whether he made it. It was holding an old man's hand on a kitchen floor while his wife of 50 years watched, and telling him he was doing fine when he was not. It was coming home at sunrise with all of that still in my chest and standing in my kids' doorways just to watch them breathe. Because after a night of other people's worst moments, the sound of my own children sleeping safe was the only thing that put me back together. That was the deal I thought I had made. I would go out into the dark and carry the hard things so that my family could stay in the light. I never once imagined that the light I was working to protect had gone out behind me while I was gone, and that the person I trusted to keep it burning was the one who had blown it out. I want to tell you about the man because he matters as much as anyone in this. His name was Ray, and Ray did not come in through a window. Ray came in through the front door, the way the most dangerous ones always do. Invited, trusted, welcome. He had coached my son's rec baseball team 2 summers back. A friendly guy, good with the kids, always the last one to leave the field. We had him over for a cookout once or twice. I shook his hand. I thanked him for being good to my boy. And somewhere in there, on the nights I was out running calls, that same man went from Coach Ray to Uncle Ray in my own house. And my wife let it happen. And worse than let it, she built it. She taught my children to call another man family, while their father was out in the dark keeping the lights on for strangers. Here is the part I have to own, because I will not tell this if I cannot be honest. There had been a distance for a couple of years that I had explained away. Dana pulling back, less laughing. A coolness I told myself was just 2 tired parents passing each other, one going to work as the other came home. I had 100 quiet readings and I refused to look at any of them, because looking meant my safe, warm house was not safe and not warm. And a man will drive past that truth 1,000 times before he will stop and treat it. Let me tell you how the signs had been showing, the ones I see now plain as a monitor going flat. The phone, of course. Face down for 2 years. A passcode where there had never been one, carried into every room. The nights I called home on my break, and it rang, and then a text came back. Busy with the kids. Talk tomorrow. My son getting quiet with me in a way I chalked up to 15. A neighbor who started to say something to me once in the driveway, and then thought better of it and just said it was good to see me. And the thing I cannot forgive myself for. The way my boy stopped wanting Coach Ray to come to his games anymore. The way he would go stiff at the name, and how I read it as a teenager being moody instead of what it was. A kid who had figured out something he had no words for, and no idea what to do with. There were other things, too, that I filed under nothing at the time. The way the leftovers in the fridge some mornings were from a restaurant I had not taken anyone to. A second coffee mug in the drying rack on days I had worked all night and could not have used it. The way Dana started caring about how she looked on Tuesday and Thursday evenings, my long shifts, when for years she had not fussed over an ordinary weeknight. A charge here and there I did not place and did not ask about, because asking my own wife about a charge felt like an insult to the trust I was so proud of. And the kids' bedtimes drifting later on my work nights, which I had thought was just summer or just laziness, but which I understand now was a house running on a different schedule than the one I believed in. A whole evening life happening in my home that I was never part of and never told about. Every single one of those had an innocent answer if you took it alone. It is only when you lay the whole week of them out together, the way you lay out a patient's symptoms instead of treating each one in isolation, that the real diagnosis stares back at you. I had all the symptoms in front of me for 2 years. I just never once stepped back and read the whole patient. I will not pretend I understood all of it the night my daughter said his name. I did not. But I understood enough. I understood that a man my children called Uncle was in my home on the nights I worked, and that my wife had taught them to call him that, and that not one person had told me. And I understood, sitting on that little bed, that I was the medic now arriving on the scene of my own life, and that the first rule of every scene is the same. You do not run in. You stop at the door. You size it up. You make sure that what you do next does not create a second patient, especially when the patients are your own kids. So I did not confront anyone that night. I tucked my daughter in, I checked on my son, and the next morning, instead of burning my house down, I made 2 phone calls. But first, I had to get through a shift. And I have to tell you about that night, because it is the one that taught me I could do the hard thing. The very next evening I had to clock in and run calls, with everything I had just learned sitting in my chest like a stone. And somewhere around 3 in the morning, we got a bad one. A young mother, a car, the kind of call that hollows you out. And I want you to understand something about my work. When you walk onto a scene like that, you do not get to bring your own grief with you. You set it down at the door, every bit of it. Because the person in front of you needs all of you. And a medic who is somewhere else in his head gets people killed. So I set down my own broken marriage on the pavement, and I gave that stranger everything I had. Steady hands, calm voice, every year of training. And we got her to the hospital alive. And in the back of that rig, between sets of vitals, I learned the thing that carried me through the whole rest of this. I learned that I already knew how to do this. I had spent 18 years learning to stay calm and useful inside other people's catastrophes. I just had to do it now inside my own. The job had been training me my whole career for the worst call I would ever run, which was the one waiting at my own address. The first was to a lawyer, and what that lawyer told me is the most important thing I can hand you tonight. So write it down. Do not blow up. Do not move out. Do not say one word against their mother in front of those kids. Get quiet. Get steady. And let the most important thing about you become the thing that is most true, that you are the safe place. The lawyer was a woman in the county seat who had been doing custody work for almost 30 years, and she had a calm that put the floor back under me. I told her everything. The name, the coach, the night shifts, the quiet. And then she told me some things about how Pennsylvania looks at children, and I'm going to share the shape of them, because they changed everything about how I carried myself. Though I want to be clear, I am no lawyer, and your state runs its own way, and you need your own attorney for your own life. This is just my story. She told me that in this state, a custody case is not a prize fight, and it is not about who got wronged. She said the court looks at one thing above all, the best interest of the child, and that it weighs a whole long list of factors to get there. She said the very first thing on a judge's mind is the child's safety and stability. She said the court looks hard at who actually does the daily work of raising the kids, the meals and the homework and the doctor and the school. Not who says they do, but who really does and who will keep doing it. And then she told me the one that I have thought about every day since. She said the court pays close attention to which parent is most willing to support the child's relationship with the other parent. She said the parent who tears the other one down, who blocks and poisons and uses the kids as weapons, very often loses on exactly that point. Because a judge can see that a child needs both parents and will favor the one mature enough to protect that. I want to stop on that, because it is the heart of how I got through this without becoming someone my kids could not respect. The law and my own conscience were pointing the exact same direction. Never run their mother down in front of them. Never make them choose. Never use what I knew as a weapon. Not because it was strategy, though it was, but because they were my kids, and they loved their mom, and that love was not mine to break. The most powerful thing I could do, in the courtroom and in their hearts, was simply be the steady one. So that is what I set out to be. She gave me the rules, and they are the rules I want you to carry no matter where you live. Do not move out of the house, because the day you pack a bag, you have walked away from your own kid's front door and handed away the daily life that proves you are their home. Do not confront, because the second she knows you know, the careful picture you need to build starts moving. Do not freeze accounts or do anything a judge would frown on, and above all, document the truth. Not with venom, just with facts. The school pickups and the bedtimes and the doctor visits and the games, the quiet record of a father who shows up. So that is what I did. And I will be honest with you, it was the hardest acting of my life. because I had to go home and be a calm husband to a woman who was raising my kids to call another man uncle, and I had to do it without tipping my hand and without poisoning my children against their own mother. I have walked into rooms with 2 people dying and a family screaming and kept my hands steady. Nothing was harder than sitting across the breakfast table from Dana, asking about her day, while I quietly built the case for my children's future. Here is the part I want every working father to hear, because it is where men like me usually lose, and it is where I won. Dana's plan, when it all came into the open, was going to be simple, and it was going to be brutal. She was going to say I was never there. She was going to point at the night shifts, the missed bedtimes, the games I worked through, and she was going to paint me as the absent one, the father who was married to his job. And she was going to offer the judge a tidy story in which she was the one who was always home, and I was the one who was always gone. And the worst part is that on paper, the hours looked like her story was true. So I went to work proving the deeper truth. I started keeping a quiet record of everything I actually did. Because a night shift father is not an absent father. He is a father who parents in the daylight while other dads are at the office. On my days off, I was the one at school pickup. I was the one at the pediatrician, and I had the appointment records to show it. I was the one who had coached my daughter's T-ball, who knew her teacher's name, who packed the lunches and signed the permission slips and sat up with a feverish kid. My lawyer told me that judges in this state care about exactly that, who does the daily work and who will keep doing it, and that the hours a man works matter far less than whether he shows up for his children when he is not working. I had spent 15 years showing up. I just had to prove it, calmly, with a record, instead of with a speech. The record was not hard to build, but it was humbling to gather, because I had never thought to keep proof that I loved my own kids. Who does? So I went and got it. I called the pediatrician's office and asked for the visit history. And there was my name, again and again, the parent who brought them in. I had the team roster from the season I coached T-ball. I had a phone full of photos with timestamps. Me at the science fair, me at the recital, me on the floor building a fort on a Saturday. I remembered being dead tired from a Friday night shift and doing it anyway. I had the school's record of who showed up for conferences, and it was me, more often than not. Because Dana found those things tedious, and I never did. None of it was dramatic. All of it together was the truth, the quiet, undeniable truth of a man who had been there all along. In the daylight hours, while the timesheet at the ambulance company told a different and much thinner story. I kept all of this organized and off the family computer, on the advice of my lawyer, and I learned how careful I had to be. One morning, home off a shift, I had the folder of records out on the kitchen table when Dana came down earlier than I expected. I had a few seconds. The folder went into my work bag, under my spare uniform, where she would never look, and I was pouring coffee like any tired medic home from a long night before she was fully in the room. She asked if I was all right, said I looked worn down. I told her it had been a rough night, which was true enough. Every night was a rough night now. After that, I kept the folder in my locker at the station, where my own house could not reach it. Keep the proof somewhere safe from the very home it concerns. That is not paranoia. On a bad scene, you secure your equipment before you need it, not after. Now here is where the story turns. And I am going to be careful, because it involves my kids, and they will always come first. I never once questioned my children to build my case. Let me say that plainly, because it matters more than anything else in this whole story. I did not sit my 8-year-old down and ask her about Uncle Ray. I did not turn my son into a witness against his mother. A child is never a tool, not for a court case, not for revenge, not for anything. And any father who uses his kids that way has already lost the thing worth winning. What I did instead was make my home the calmest, safest, most ordinary place on earth for those 2 kids, so that whatever was coming, they had solid ground under their feet. the truth I needed, the court would find through grown-up channels, through the lawyers and the records and the proper process. My job was to protect my children from the weight of all of it, not to load it onto their small shoulders. There was a near miss, and it was not the kind you would expect. It came in the custody process itself, and it nearly took my kids from me. Dana's lawyer did exactly what I knew they would. They laid out the hours. They made me sound like a ghost in my own house. A man who was never home, who left his wife to raise the children alone while he chased overtime in the dark. There was a stretch, a few weeks in, where it genuinely looked like the court might see a night shift medic and a stay-home mom and split it down the easy line, every other weekend for Dad. And I lay awake on more than one of those nights with a fear I have never felt on any emergency scene. The fear of losing my own children to a tidy story that left out the truth. I will tell you how close it felt. Because I want any father in this spot to know the fear is normal and it is survivable. There was one hearing where their lawyer stood up and described my life in a way that was technically accurate and completely false. A man absent 5 nights a week. A man whose children barely saw him. A man more married to his job than his family. And sitting there, hearing my own life told back to me as an indictment, I felt something close to panic. Because the hours were real, the timesheets were real, and for a moment I could see the easy, wrong conclusion forming. Every instinct screamed at me to stand up and shout that it was a lie, that I was a good father, that she was the one who had brought a stranger into our kids' lives. And I did not. I sat still. I let my lawyer do her work, calm and slow, because I had learned long ago that the man who panics on the scene is the man who makes it worse. I trusted the record. I trusted the truth. And it held. What turned it was not a dramatic moment. It was the quiet record. It was the pile of pediatrician sign-ins with my name on them. It was the teachers who could say it was Dad at every conference. It was the years of T-ball and homework and fevers. Documented. Undramatic. Undeniable. And it was the thing Dana never understood, that by trying to cut me out, by painting my involvement as nothing, by working to limit how much my own kids saw me, she had walked straight into the one factor that hurt her most. Because a court in this state looks hard at which parent will support the children's bond with the other. And she had shown her whole hand on that. I never had to say a bad word about her. She made the case against herself. And I made the case for my kids. And those are very different things. And the difference is everything. My son, 15 and old for his age, was given the chance, in the careful and protected way these things are properly done, to be heard. I did not coach him. I did not ask him for anything. I told him only one thing, the same thing I will tell any of you with a kid in that spot. I told him that whatever he felt, whatever he said, he would never be in trouble with me for telling the truth. That he did not have to protect any adult, including me, and that I loved him exactly the same no matter what. What he said, in his own words, for his own reasons, carried weight precisely because no one had put it in his mouth. A child's voice is only worth something when it is truly his own, and I made sure my son's was. Here is how it ended, and I will tell it plain, because plain is the only way it is true. There was no dramatic courtroom scene. The law is rarely dramatic. It is records and hearings, and a judge who has seen 1,000 of these and is looking, quietly, for the parent who is the safer harbor. Because I had never moved out, the daily life of those kids was still anchored to me and our home. Because I had a real record of showing up, the absent father story fell apart the moment it met the paperwork. Because I had never once run their mother down, I was the parent the court could trust to protect what those kids needed most, which was both of their parents. And because of all of it, the children's primary home is with me, in the house they grew up in, on a schedule that still gives them their mother, because they love her, and they should. I want to be clear about something. Because the brand of this is not cruelty. Dana is still their mom. She sees them. I have never spoken a hard word about her where they could hear it, and I never will, because they did not betray anybody. And a child gets to love a parent without the other parent poisoning the well. What she did to me, not to them. And I was not going to make them pay for it by taking their mother's place in their hearts. That was the hardest discipline of the whole thing, and it is the part I am proudest of. I have thought a lot about why Dana did what she did, not to excuse it, but because I am their father, and someday my kids may ask me, and I owe them an answer that is not poison. I think she was lonely. I think 5 nights a week alone after the kids were down is a long quiet for anybody. And I think I told myself that providing was the same as being present for so long that I stopped being present in the ways that actually hold a marriage together. That does not make what she did right. Bringing a stranger into our children's lives behind my back was hers to own, and she will own it for the rest of her life. But I have made my peace with my own part. The years I was a paycheck and a sleeping shape in the bed instead of a husband. Because owning my part is the only way I can stand in front of my kids clean. A man can be wronged and still have something to answer for, and the men who heal are the ones honest enough to hold both at once. My kids came through it, slowly, the way kids do when the ground stops moving. My son, who had carried that stiff silence for so long, started talking to me again. Really talking. The kind of late kitchen table talks I had missed during all those years in the dark. My daughter stopped asking about Uncle Ray and went back to asking the ordinary, enormous questions of an 8-year-old. Why the sky does what it does, and whether dogs dream. The greatest thing that came out of the worst year of my life is that my children watched their father get hurt about as deeply as a man can be hurt, and not turn mean, not fall apart, not make them choose. They learned, by watching, that you can take the hardest blow there is and still keep your hands steady and your heart decent. I cannot think of a more important thing to teach a child, and I would not have chosen to teach it this way, but I am not sorry they learned it. The man, Ray, did exactly what men like him always do. The minute it stopped being a fun secret on quiet weeknights and became a real thing with real weight. A divorce. A custody case. 2 kids who now knew he was gone. The version of him that played uncle around my kitchen evaporated the second it cost him something. He was never going to be the family man he pretended to be on those night shift evenings. Because that man does not exist. That man was a costume he wore as long as it was easy. My kids do not see him anymore. They are young enough and steady enough now that he is becoming a name they barely remember, and I am grateful for that every day. I think about that, sometimes. How a man can walk into a family wearing the face of a friend, sit at the table, coach the boy, earn the little girl's trust, and never once be what he pretended to be. The dangerous ones do not break the door down. They knock politely, and they smile, and they wait for the nights you are not home. The only defense a man really has against that is to stay close enough to his own family to know who is sitting at his table. And that was the lesson I paid the highest price to learn. I had been so busy being the hero on other people's worst nights that I let a stranger become a fixture on my own children's ordinary ones. I do not make that mistake anymore. I know every name my kids say now. I make sure of it. And I will tell you the part I did not expect. The healing did not come from any of the legal victory. It came on an ordinary Tuesday, a while later, an off night, when I was home to tuck my daughter in myself, and she was half asleep with her cheek on the pillow, the same as that first terrible night. And she did not ask about Uncle Ray. She just said, "Good night, Daddy," the way she always had, like the world was exactly the size and shape it was supposed to be. And I sat on the edge of that bed in the dark again. And this time the quiet was not a bleed. This time the quiet was just my kids, safe, asleep, in their own home, with their dad down the hall. That is the only verdict that ever mattered to me. Here is what I have left for you, and then I will let you rest. In my work, the quiet patient is the one you run to first, because quiet is what bleeding on the inside sounds like. A marriage can go quiet the same way, and a man can spend years mistaking that silence for peace because he so badly wants it to be peace. So pay attention to the quiet in your own house, not with suspicion, but the way a good medic pays attention, calmly, watching for the still grey patient behind the loud one. And if you ever do walk into the scene of your own life and find it worse than you feared, do not run in and make a second casualty. Stop at the door. Size it up. Protect the vulnerable ones first, the kids who did not ask for any of it. Keep your head, keep your hands clean, keep your mouth shut about their other parent, and let the truth and the process do the work that rage never could. You will get them to safety, and they will grow up knowing their father was the steady one. If you are a man who works while the world sleeps, hear me on this. Being gone in the dark to provide does not make you an absent father. Showing up in the daylight, again and again, for the small, ordinary things, is what makes you their home. Keep showing up. Write none of it down out of spite, but keep the quiet record of a man who was there, because someday the truth of who actually raised those children may be the most important case you ever make. And make it the way you would run any scene that matters. Calm, steady, hands clean. First, do no harm. Take care of yourselves out there. Hug your kids a little longer tonight. And tell me where you are watching from. I read every single one.